Welcome back. This is our second and last panel, after which we're all going to get up here and take your questions. Very briefly, I would like to introduce the two speakers. Noureddine Amara, here, is a historian of Algeria, writing on the question of nationality in colonial and Ottoman context. And Youssef Ben Ismail is a historian of Ottoman North Africa again, writing Algeria and Tunisia, and maybe other places too, I don't know, but certainly Algeria and Tunisia. He works on law and imperialism in the 19th century, and he is currently a Mellon Fellow at Columbia Society of Fellows. So,
thank you so much. Thank you, Youssef, for inviting me for this panel. I will not say thanks to Amara because I don't really have any for today. But I would like to say thanks to Emmanuelle Saada, because I don't know if you remember, but the first time I heard my work here was 10 years ago. And she invited me to present my works, and 10 years after I'm here. And she's very important for me here because she's a part of the Maghreb connections at Columbia University and at Maison Française. And this is something that has at least me to find my place here. So for that, for your time, for your generosity since 10 years, I just want to say thank you, Emmanuelle. So I will try to speak in English. It's not something I used to do, but I have to. And I would like to talk about the questions of the nationality in Algeria, and especially at the moment of the fall of Algiers. I don't know, I can consider myself like an Ottoman historian. I have to say that I don't believe in the boundary between disciplinary. But if I have to define myself, I would say that I'm working on this kind of time of transitions during two empires, the French one and the Ottoman one. And my idea is to have a glance at these moments where when the French Empire tried to legitimate in presence in Algeria and for the questions of nationality. So first, I would like to show you this this document, this certificate of nationality Algerian. I discovered this certificate of nationality and all started from this document. Because for me it was surprising that we use the qualifications of Algerian nationality. Because as you maybe know, the classical historiography used to say that there was no Algerian nationality before 1962. And all my questioning about this question started because I discovered this document. I'm not trying to say that there is a nation or a nationality before 1830, because this is not my point. And I believe that this question for me is not irrelevant. And maybe we can talk about this during the discussion. So what I want to say is why these documents allow me to renew my questioning and to consider colonial law, and especially nationality law, as a narrative of violence. And I would like to start with the point I call it semantic as a front line during the War of Conquest. On February 1914, in a handwritten note from the service of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jordan wondered and worried about an Algerian nationality, of which he understood the diplomatic risk of this label without grasping its full historical meaning. And he asked, what is the Algerian nationality? Please ask the embassy in Constantinople, and please have a copy of the attached certificate taken. So this Algerian nationality appears in large print on the certificate issued in 1907 to Mehdi ben Mohammed ben Abdullah by the French consulate in Smyrna. Disconcerted, the French diplomacy causes an embarrassed look on the certificate of Algerian nationality under French visa. And it was sent to them by the French deputy Albarose, asking for clarifications. It is this duplicate that we found in the archive on the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Fonds Convention et Contentieux. Accompanied by this commentary, Mr. Albarose ask the contentious of foreign affairs what this certificate of Algerian nationality means and point out all the inconvenience that it can have, especially in Ottoman countries. So here we have an Algerian nationality encircled by a typographical sign that it will drag for half a century and maybe more. These quotation marks, out of irony or concern, forbid to read this word in full literalness. The meaning of what is the Algerian nationality is contentious. So we can find this kind of certificate since 1830-31. So since the beginning of the French occupations, French consul in the Ottoman Empire delivered this kind of document to Algerians who asked for their consular protections. So instead of the formula Algerian nationality, another formula is considered more adequate to the legal nature of the Algerian, like French Republic patent of French subjects, as a circle mentions on the said handwritten notes noted. So this archive that we are reading today is not the personal work of Mehdi Ben Mohammed Ben Abdullah and his habit of keeping his identity papers beyond their expiration dates. It is not, a matter of family paper constituted in private archive. This Algerian nationality and family is important and its equivocations. Another archive constituted in an archive, and the gesture that sets it apart is a state story, the French one that signals the question of Algerian nationality as a language of the 1830 event, the French conquest and the colonization of Algerians. In other words, this is the point I defend during my thesis. We could consider the questions of the nationality of the Algerians like the regime of truth of what was the 5 July 1830. So I would like to question here the possibilities of the narrative contained in these documents, but also in such a correction of language, and to detail the various possibilities of telling this document, both from the point of view of law, but also historiography. And indeed, the French conquest automatically made Algerians French, at least in the legal sense, and stripped them from their Ottoman nationality. This automatic legal statute was rooted in the principle of public international law. And I dispute and I challenge this a priori of the law by comparing it with both the lawmaking process and this claim to French nationality undertaken by Algerians residing especially in the Ottoman Empire. So what I would like to talk with you is few old-fashioned hypotheses, because as I said, I started this work 10 years ago, of the question of language as an attempt at an objective settlement of the succession of states between French and Ottoman Empire. Because all the diplomatic correspondence read on this subject in the archive is subject to real funds. It's a question of retaining the fact of conquest and French annexations at the threshold of the legal system, and for the French side of availing itself of the fate accomplished. And we could consider, from my point of view, that the nationality disputes as a work under quotations, legal work that continues the work of conquest. So in 1914, the alarm was so strong that it resonated in the French parliament in a question of semantics. Albin Rosé, deputy president of the Commission of External Affairs, sent the certificate of Algerian nationality, delivered by the Chancellery of the General Consulate of France in Smyrna, and demanded explanations concerning the recognition of this nationality, which does not exist in law. And in a written question addressed to the minister on this subject, Albin Rosé highlighted the disadvantages of this naming that does not clearly establish that Algerians are French subjects and that it is under this quality that French consuls protect them. So this is some of the quotations we can find of this correspondence between Albin Rosé and the embassy and the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he has for try to find a formula more conform to the questions of the French sovereignty in Algeria. I can let you if you want 2 minutes for reading it if you want. I don't know if it's useful for you. What I want to say now is already on June 1885, by way of a circular about Algerians, the French embassy in Constantinople enjoined its consular services to this correction of language. Nearly 40 years before Urban interpellations, this circular already warns against the fairly widespread usage, and especially of its officiality. The embassy, the French one, already noted the semantic correlations of an ill-gotten sovereignty in Algeria, making itself amends for having abandoned itself to the formula of Algerian nationality, excusing herself for its habit of language. The French embassy justified the scriptural discipline imposed on the agents by the consideration taken up later by Al-Bahoudi. We can read this other quotations saying that this formula, which is perfectly correct, is not without its disadvantages in Ottoman country, because it tends to make people admit that we separate Algerian nationality from French nationality. And you know that under the term of the Senatus Consul of July 14, 1865, Algerians are French. We therefore have no reason to place them in a sort of special category by designating them as being of Algerian nationality. So in these lines, we read the idea of the relative effect of territories on the truth of legal statements. We can note that declared as inaccurate in 1914, the Algerian nationality was in this circular reputed to be perfectly correct, although improper in Ottoman country. So prohibiting the use of the Algerian nationality formula aims to limit the growing number of nationality conflicts between French consul and Ottoman authorities. So the objective is to find a legal formula which, sizing the Algerian in an exclusive relationship to a French state, is judged adequate to the necessity of situations. So consequently, the circular continues. Whenever an Algerian is involved, either in her official correspondence or for registrations in consular register, or finally in acts of any kind which are under your jurisdictions, I ask you to mention him as French subject, or of French nationality, indicating, if necessary, the place and the department of Algeria from which he comes. So the qualifications of Algerian French subjects by clearly indicating the change of nationality of the Algerian will give the French conquest a certain irreversibility. The transfer of sovereignty to France over Algeria will be effective by the detour of the French diplomatic granted to the Algerian, even though this recognition was contested by the war of resistance that the Algerian opposed in Algeria itself. While the formula Algerian nationality will mean that an unaccomplished conquest. So that matter for me that it's nearly a century after the French military victory in 1830. The conquest will still be awaiting its legal completions by the French nationality. And to continue to say that Algerian are still Algerian is to play into the hand of the Ottoman state, which claim them its own subject when Algerians reside in its territory. So just for explaining you why for me the question of language, especially during this moment naturalization, is very important, and why I have a kind of obsession with the question of narratives inside the archive, and the narrative hidden by the process of lawmaking. I would like to say that whatever it is an abuse of language, of the truth, of these hesitations of French diplomacy regarding Algerian nationality, articulates the act of designating Algerian to a strong sovereign risk. And to counter this, the circular opposes to these indeterminations the truth of law that should be admitted as a principle of unquestionable evidence. The Algerian French since July 14, 1865. For me, this concern about language is less what is an Algerian than what is France in Algeria. And as the succession of states was not clearly settled by legal means, this explains why semantics was both a kind of fault line and a line of defense for the states. In short, the legal indeterminacy born of the work of war explain this over-investment of language by the states, both the Ottoman and French one. The problem posed by the nationality of Algerian is as much a problem of legality as a question of the legitimacy of France in Algeria. And because of that, the conflict of nationality that arose in the international order concerning the Algerians obliged in an endless way France to repeat the exegesis of 5 July 1830. So when I have tried to make it work during my PhD, not at the least copy of the law. I mean the clarinet law, and we just read the law in these final versions, and work on the draft of the law, on the draft of diplomatic correspondence as well. Not the nationality as a legal problem, but tirelessly regresses to the moment of the fall of Algiers. And it is just a question of questioning nationality not as a simple operation of law, but as a re-examination of the competitive historical meaning of July 5, 1830, a rethinking of our historiography in short. And in other words, it is a sovereign imperative, a state arbitrariness that gives Algerian nationality its first corrections of form and meaning, its first conflict of interpretation as well. And linked to this state arbitrariness, I decided to interrogate the truth stated in the Senatus Consul of July 14 in 1865 of the Algerian French. And to do this, we must return to the war of conquest, because we should consider the war of conquest as the first test of Algerian nationality. So I call this, entitled this part of my presentation as a French nationality for forgiveness of the war. It's not my point of view, but this is the point of view of the French, and especially in Napoleon III, the French emperor, who went to Algiers in 1865, 2 months before the Senatus Consul was written. So I would like to present this point like a kind of moral economy of the nationality. And it's very important for me to link these two events. I mean, this official travel to Algeria and the process of lawmaking. And especially because the Ottoman state, the Ottoman embassy in Paris, was in a kind of alarm when they knew the departure of Emperor Napoleon III for Algeria. So for the Ottoman ambassador in Paris, this news warranted an official report to his supervising minister back in Istanbul. The archive of the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul revealed that an attentive heir state turned to Algeria for the 6 weeks that followed Napoleon III imperial trip, and put the Sultan Parisian embassy on alert, keen to follow each step for the new master of Algeria, which 30 years earlier was under Ottoman control. So in the French perspective, the emperor has gone to Algeria to celebrate peace, believing that the conquest was complete. And Napoleon III pretended to extend a friendly hand to the lost Arab, and so to them to be treated with generosity and justice as part of the great French family from now on. So this event interests me because it touched on all the question of nationality and the competing historical representations that nationality contains. On May 5, 1865, the speech made by Napoleon III in front of the Algerians takes the turn of "Do not be afraid." He said, "Tells you brothers that tell your lost brother," and it's this qualification is very important, that attempting new insurrection will be a fatal for them. 2 million Arabs cannot resist 40 million French people. The fight of 1 against 20 is insane. So the emperor wants to discourage those who persist in war, and in instilling insurgents only represented a handful of misguided individuals scattered among the majority of Arabs inclined to heed his advice of caution. He said again, accept the accomplished facts. But in my mind, I mean, the emperor's trip betrays the French anxiety of being submerged by the numerical and demographic superiority of the Arab in their Algerian colony. The Arab people still struck terror in the French even 35 years after the landing and victory of his African army. This is why the emperor mentioned the 40 million French who, according to him, stand ready waiting on a footing of war to ensure Algeria remains French. And he wants potential Algerian insurgents by reminding them what they have learned about France, what I quote, particularly what it means to be our friends or enemies. These proclamations contains multiple interpolations for friendships. And how better to achieve this rapprochement between enemies than through Quranic references? Indeed, the strongest argument for the French ruler against the continuation of hostility came from God's own judgments through the test of arms. And he said, as God has spoken, recognize the decrees of providence, which in its mysterious deeds often leads us to good by disappointing our hopes and causing our efforts to fail. He said again, accept the fact, the prophet said, God gives power to whom he wills. And another extract of the Quran, and recognize as the Quran does that he whom God directs is well directed. So to continue the struggle will be something very impure. And this proclamation to the Arabs sounds like a true profession of faith, trying to answer the consent of the natives. So we should wonder about the suggestion of wanting to make a repentant man into good subject of France. And the promise of shared nationality, the shared French nationality, is made to those who repent. And repentance taken as what distinguishes good believers from those who turn their back on him by pursuing the war. So it recalls the Quranic exegesis according to which God takes the side of those who repent. And under these conditions, we can talk about that in this perspective, French nationality is framed as a secularized promise, not to stray from the right path and to be remain well-led. So this proclamation aux Arabes, this proclamation to Arabs, try to put an amicable end to the war of conquest. And in new hermeneutics of subjections, quoting Surah Al-Baqarah, reputed for its unequivocal verses, one in particular is that of the throne, Ayat al-Kursi. It invites Algerians to find the goodness hidden within the apparent evil of the French conquest. So it's like becoming French would be like entering history without straying from the path of God. And that's why I call the French nationality like it's proposed like an ethic of submissions. And these proclamations offer some sort of redress to the Algerian. It tries to compensate for the excessive violence of the war with the promise of a future well-being. And this promise of happiness is very important for understanding the agency of the Algerian when I will talk about one petitions. Yeah, so all the I have a question in my mind. I'm still questioning myself about the idea that for me maybe the question of the nationality of Algerians it's less a question of statute, but a question of contract. And maybe we should think about how Algerians claim the French nationality like something that puts the French into historical responsibility for the conquest. Yeah. Okay. So just a few words about this moral economy operating in the Senatus Council of July 1865, and then I would like to talk about this document quickly. So my point is that I defend the idea that the legal question of nationality can be read as a part of narrative of foundations through which the colonial power attempts to soften its violent conquest. And it is this process of careful descriptions and staging that becomes a legal device to recount the story of precarious positions while concealing it at the same time. And because of the lack of indigenous consent, here I believe we touched upon the deep insecurity of winners regarding their victory. The other idea behind it is that we should consider, I mean, in the legal point of view, the native as how that it can be. I mean, I challenge this idea that only discriminations from the Republican concept of nationality can help us understand the work of a law of nationality in Algeria. And for me, it's not true. I mean, it's a new kind of belonging of the states, just because of this lack of consent and this idea that the questions of the legitimacy of the French in Algeria is a question that never ended. So for me, French subjection postponed the war in law, but does not broaden it. And and I would like to say that prior to the Senatus Council, the Algerian was trapped in unwritten rules that the courts determined by a mix of evidence and equivocations. So the period between July 5, 1830 and July 14, 1865 is not legal desert. I mean, this long period tested the law to the point that the law of nationality in French Algeria became a serious risk. And these were almost 35 years during which the vanquished, the indigenous people, were effectively under observations, so that the law of nationality could be developed into the best system of defense possible. So that's why I criticize the historiography that's kind of monumentalizing the Senatus Council of July 1465, and who goes no deeper into the question of the nationality of Algerians than its primordial affirmation that the native were French. I have to do it quickly, so I will not do it. Okay. Yes, I will perform. I will try. Okay, so this is an extract. This is a petition written by a nephew of the Emir Abdelkader, the famous Algerian resistance. Not the only one, because in the Algerian historiography and the French one too, we used to put Emir Abdelkader in the front, and Ahmed Bey is someone also important. We don't talk a lot about him. But my point is to try to compare the narrative of the law, the French law, and how the Algerian people use it. And we notice some discrepancies between the meaning of what was a nationality, what it means to belong to the state, a colonial state, and claiming its protections. And in this extract, no, it's the brother. Sorry, it's the brother of the Emir Abdelkader asking the French Foreign Ministry of restitutions of property in Algeria, and he believed that the link between the French state and Algerian people, even though they don't have the French nationality, it's something that I call it putting the French state in debt, and in debt because of the conquest of Algeria. And if we look to the vocabulary used by these people, it's a question of not having rights. I mean, in a way that the law gives you right to claim French nationality. It's question of justice. It's question of compensations, and it's also questions of the right to be happy, because they promised. They said you promised that to Emir Abdelkader when he surrendered. So what's it mean to be happy if you don't have enough money, and if we can make a life possible in the Ottoman Empire according to the social rank they believe they have. So they said, حقنا من عيارة الملك ولدنا. For example, and they use that for describing the moral situations. How is it, chagrin? Or, I mean,
sorrow.
Yes, how we can say that again?
Sorrow.
No, in English. Yeah, I mean, being not having
lack of comfort.
Yes, lack of comfort and not having enough resources. I'm sorry, I'm too long, so I have to pass. So this is another petition written by the son of the brother of Emir Abdelkader, so the nephew of Emir Abdelkader. When so Noureddine, when his father died, he continued as a kind of familial legacy, the petition written by his father. And when the French government refusing to compensate the fact that the property in Algeria was expropriated, he said, okay, they surprised me a lot, Excellency, because the said sum had been designated annually to my late father in compensation of the part of the incomes of the immense property of his father, the Emir Noureddine, confiscated in Algeria by the government of France, and of which I am the rightful heir. So consequently, I take the respectful liberty to come to submit to your Excellency that according to the Treaty of Peace concluded between France and my poor uncle, the Emir Abdelkader, the incomes of the property of our family must remain and reach us. It is all the more just that Prince Abdelkader delivered himself in person to the chief of the French army in Algeria, who undertook in the name of the government of France to make the whole family of the Emir happy. I have 5 minutes? Huh? No? So maybe if just, I don't know, I would like just one, yes. If I can just read that, because I would like maybe to talk about this. So in 1908 and 1910, the second generations of Algerian migrants in the Ottoman Empire were subject to the conscriptions, military service, you say that? Yeah, conscriptions. And they went to the French consulate and telling him, no, we don't want to do the conscriptions. And I would just like you to read this justification, because I believe it's very important, maybe to have a few words about that during the discussion, and I will finish off on this. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm your last speaker for the day, so bear with me and thank you for everybody's attention. I'll speak for 20 minutes, but I do want to thank our sponsors. Many departments sponsored this event and many centers, and I want to thank them for their generosity. I want to thank Asia, who was our translator, who did a great job. Ararat, obviously, I know everybody thanked him, but I have to thank him too personally. And Zeynep and Emmanuelle, who were wonderful co-organizers of mine for this workshop, symposium, however you might call it. So in 1970, Abdallah Al-Arawi, then North Africa's foremost historian, published an influential 2-volume essay on the history of the Maghreb. Al-Arawi's project consisted in an ambitious reading of Maghrebi history from pre-modern times all the way to the post-colonial period, which at the time had really only started 8 years earlier with the independence of Algeria in 1962. And faithful to the ethos of the Maghreb's intellectual milieu in the 1960s, Al-Arawi's essay seems exclusively concerned with North Africa's position vis-à-vis Europe. In his account, Europe was the Maghreb's ineluctable, if undesirable, alter ego. From the age of early modern piracy to the rise of Mediterranean trade, all the way to the colonial period, his essays shot through with a sense of historical inevitability. He argued, for instance, that colonization was already latent in and predictable through the political crises of the 14th and the 15th century. In line with this perspective, the book's chapter on the 18th century and early 19th century is titled Dans l'attente, in waiting. The title is all the more striking considering the fact that Al-Arawi, who probably thought it was self-evident, never bothered to explain in his chapter what was 18th century North Africa waiting for. The teleological weight that the colonial period imposes on its pasts, in the plural, had lasting effects for the way Maghrebi societies understand their own history. Only recently have historians begun to explore what else can be said about pre-colonial North Africa other than the fact that it was waiting for colonialism. So today, in my short talk, I would like to explore this theme while keeping close attention to the related question of how the Maghreb ended up with historical narratives stuck in this colonial-centric orbit in the first place. I will focus on the content and on the trajectory of a specific manuscript, which was stolen in 1837 by a French officer during the sack of the palace of Ahmed Bey, the Ottoman governor of Constantine. Following the Ottoman and colonial itineraries of this manuscript, I'd like to propose that we understand the historical perspective epitomized by Al-Arawi, but really pervasive among Maghrebi historians of the post-colonial period, as an inherited historiographical injury, a concept I'll return to in the conclusion of my short talk. The manuscript I'd like to focus on is housed at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under the archival reference Supplément Turc 1349. A note written in French on the last folio indicates that the manuscript was, quote-unquote, taken, pris, by a French captain named César Marulaz during the sack of the palace of Ahmed Bey, the Ottoman governor of the city of Constantine, when the French army was taking the city, conquering the city in 1837. Marulaz stole the manuscript in order to gift it to his cousin, a man named Gabriel Peignot, who was living in the town of Dijon in eastern France. This much we learned from this folio. And on this slide, you can see this slide. You can see the location of the palace in Constantine. Marulaz was not the only French soldier, unsurprisingly, who stole manuscripts during the conquest of Constantine. Far from it. In 1925, the colonial officer in charge of conservation at the Library of Algiers stated that numerous libraries in metropolitan France held manuscripts that came from Constantine, and that most of them could be traced back, in fact, to gifts coming from officers who participated in the 1837 conquest, and, I quote, who wanted to bring back to their towns a souvenir of the expedition to which they participated. And in addition to the looting, the French army also destroyed hundreds of manuscripts in Constantine. Cédillo, a French Orientalist writing a couple of decades after the conquest, stated that during said conquest, the French army, quote, burned the Arabic manuscripts found in the city, like true barbarians, end of quote. Another colonial observer conceded that the French officers had, quote, pillaged the city and its palaces in 1837, its books in particular, but claimed that the most important libraries were spared, adding that these actions could not in any case be considered blameworthy, since the books in question should be considered spoils of war, end of quote. The Arabs, the same observer added, would have done the same had they conquered Paris. The same French scholar went so far as to claim that during the French assault, it was in fact local soldiers defending Constantine from the Ottoman side who destroyed many of the city's manuscripts before they surrendered, crediting a French general named Berbrugger for having saved many remaining volumes. The ridiculous nature of this claim aside, these testimonies show that the manuscript taken by Maroulaz in Ahmed Bey's palace was in fact one of several thousand manuscripts sacked or destroyed by French colonial officers during the conquest of Constantine and that of Algeria more generally. And most of the time, these officers picked up manuscripts as souvenirs, as we've seen, but they also stole them as a way to make some extra money when they returned home. There, they could sell them as memorabilia. And we know that in the metropole, the French bourgeoisie's commercial appetite for Oriental books extended to looted manuscripts. And so the latter flooded the French market during and after the French conquest. Gabriel Peignot, Maroulaz's cousin, to whom the book was intended, was in fact an avid collector of these works in Dijon. Throughout the 1830s, he relied on a network of local booksellers and acquaintances within the French army in order to secure a significant number of Algerian manuscripts for his private library. That he lacked the Arabic and Ottoman Turkish skills to read them in the first place seems to have been besides the point. On September 1st, 1831, Peignot wrote enthusiastically to a friend, describing his latest acquisition, a small purse of delicate red silk, looted by a French soldier in another palace, this time in the Castle of Algiers. Inside the small purse, Peignot discovered several letters and a few manuscripts written in Arabic and in Ottoman Turkish. What did these documents say? By his own admission, Peignot had no idea. He wrote to his friend, and I quote, "I think one must be a disciple of Allah to make any sense of it." So the minute they crossed the Mediterranean, the thousands of documents and manuscripts looted by the French army in Algeria lost their textual dimension. They ceased to be documents in the literal sense of showing and instructing, and instead they become artifacts of colonialism, reduced to the status of souvenirs from an Orient that is conquered, mysterious, and mute. It is hard not to wonder then about the kinds of Algerian histories these documents would have allowed historians to write, and conversely, about the silences and blind spots their looting has inevitably produced. In other words, the story of these looted manuscripts is twofold. It is about the history of precolonial, or as one would be tempted to say against Larawi, non-colonial Algeria, but it's also about the effect of colonialism itself. And Isabelle Grangot, who's here, has written brilliantly about the myriad ways these two questions intersect in the Algerian archive. Let us now turn to the content of the manuscript, which Maroulaz stole from Ahmed Bey's palace with the intention of gifting it to Peignot. It contains two parts. The first is an exegesis or tafsir of a Quranic surah, Surah Al-Mulk. The second and lengthier part, which concerns us today, is an epistle written for the use of Arabic speakers who want to learn Ottoman Turkish. It is composed of 4 chapters, along with an introduction, and a long concluding poem written in both languages, alternating between an Arabic verse and its Ottoman translation. And on this slide, on the right, you can see the Arabic in black ink and the Ottoman Turkish in red ink. The colophon indicates that the manuscript was copied in 1819, but the work itself dates back to the early decades of the 17th century. Its author is Ibn Muhammad Saleh, a scholar who lived in Cairo in the 1620s. There, he taught at the Al-Ashraf Madrasa and held the position of Sheikh Al-Arwan, which is a difficult term to translate, but can roughly be translated as leader of the Turkish speakers or representative of the Anatolians. This in turn suggests that he was the person responsible for Turkish or Turkish-speaking students, Ottoman Turkish-speaking students, at the Al-Azhar Mosque during this period. It also implies that he had excellent, and in fact, probably native, command of Ottoman Turkish. But in the introduction to this work, Muhammad Salah further revealed that he was also a scholar of Persian language. After the composition of this work, he warned his reader, he planned to begin an Arabic commentary on the Golistan of Saadi, the preeminent poet of 13th century Persian world. In other words, this was a very highly educated author who had excellent command of the Ottoman Empire's El Sinai Selassie, the three languages that defined Ottoman literary culture: Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, and Persian. And in the same introduction, Salah explains the reasons that led him to compose this work. Mansour, a high dignitary in Ottoman Egypt with a reputation for learning, hired Salah as an Ottoman Turkish tutor for his son, a boy named Ahmed. This was all the more important for the young Ahmed, considering that, as Salah noted in the introduction, the rulers of our time are the Ottomans, and their language is Ottoman Turkish. Every morning, Ahmed, the young student, met Salah, his teacher, for his class in Cairo. And at the end of the day, at the end of the course, the full course, Salah wrote an abridged version of the lessons and dedicated the work to his student, giving it the following title: The Golden Fragments, Ahmed's composition in the Turkish language. So the poem that forms the concluding section of the Golden Fragments is particularly clever. It is explicitly addressed to Ahmed, the student, whom the poem affectionately refers to bilingually as my son, waladi in Arabic, oğul or oğlum in Ottoman Turkish. And in fact, the poem's bilingual structure and its rhyming scheme acts as a clever mnemonic device designed to help Ahmed, and later the readers of this book, to commit some of the words and grammatical structures of Ottoman Turkish to memory. It also retraces the daily habits of the teacher and his students as they met for class. You can read some translated excerpts here. And as in the interest of time, I won't go into it, but as you can see, it's a very rich source for 17th century Ottoman Egyptian culture in and of itself. The poem is actually much longer. So 2 centuries later, right, it is this copy, a copy of Salah's Golden Fragments that Marie-Laz stole from Ahmed Bey's palace in Constantine. The script of this particular manuscript suggests that it was not copied by a Maghribi hand. Instead, it was likely produced in the Ottoman East, where it was purchased and then brought to Algeria. I have 2 hypotheses as to how this manuscript traveled to Constantine. The first one is that it was a gift brought to Ahmed Bey by a visitor who traveled from Egypt or the Levant. And if this hypothesis is true, it would be a particularly thoughtful gift, given the fact that Mansour's son in 17th century Cairo and the Algerian governor of Constantine in 1800 shared a first name, Ahmed. Giving a book titled Golden Fragments, or The Golden Fragments, Ahmed's composition in the Turkish language to Ahmed Bey was considered, and it would probably secure the favors of the governor to whoever it was that brought it. The second, and in my opinion, the more likely itinerary for the manuscript, is that Ahmed Bey himself brought it back to Constantine from a long pilgrimage to Mecca, which he undertook in 1818-1819. During this trip, Ahmed Bey stopped in various cities, including Tunis, Tripoli, Heraklion, Alexandria, and Cairo, before heading to the Arabian Peninsula. Many of the cities he visited during this trip were subsequently depicted in beautiful frescoes adorning several walls of his palace, which he began building in Constantine a few years after his return in 1825. In the one here on the right, you can actually see the depiction of the city of Cairo. This is, by the way, the same palace that was looted later on and where the manuscript was stolen. The date of the pilgrimage roughly corresponds to the date on which the manuscript was copied, 1819, suggests that Ahmed Bey himself brought it back from his trip, perhaps even from Cairo. Whatever the itinerary, sorry, I have to change, I know it's beautiful. Whatever the itinerary, the presence of an 1819 copy of the golden fragments in Ahmed Bey's library sheds light on a crucial aspect of the social and political history of Algerian Ottoman elites in the early 19th century. Like Mansour in 1600 Cairo, Ahmed Bey was a high-ranking dignitary in an Arab province of the Ottoman Empire. Born in Constantine, he was a kulol, the son of an Anatolian janissary who moved to the westernmost province of the empire, Jazairi Garb, or Algiers. And like most of the local elites at the time, it was partly from this Anatolian lineage that Ahmed Bey drew his political legitimacy as the governor of Constantine. However, during his tenure in the early 1800s, the relationship between Istanbul grew increasingly distant. When he was first appointed, Ahmed Bey was in fact the first governor of Constantine to be born in Algeria itself, rather than in Anatolia or in the Aegean archipelago, places that were geographically and perceived as politically closer to Istanbul. The Algeria of 1800 was an Ottoman province, but an autonomous one, the Ottomanness of which was increasingly contested by France in particular, who sought to isolate it from the Sublime Porte. And so in a sense, the presence of this manuscript, the golden fragments in the library of Ahmed Bey, illustrates the ambivalence of Algeria's position vis-à-vis the Ottoman world at the turn of the 19th century. It reveals the desire of an Algerian dignitary to cultivate his Ottoman belonging through language, Ottoman Turkish, precisely at the time when this belonging was being undermined. And Salah's admiration for Istanbul as an imperial center, which he expressed in the closing verses of the poem that I couldn't include here, may have well resonated with Ahmed Bey as well as with other Ottoman Algerian readers in the early 19th century. Most crucially, though, the fact that Ahmed Bey held a copy of the golden fragments in his library inscribes 1800 Constantine within the broader cultural and intellectual landscape of the Ottoman Arab world. In the early 19th century, a great number of manuscript copies of the golden fragments were produced throughout the Arab Middle East. I was able to locate several of them in various libraries in France, in the UK, and Tunisia, and Turkey. They were all copied in the Ottoman Arab provinces, roughly between 1800 and 1830. In fact, the golden fragments became such a bestseller in a way during this period that Buell, the famous Cairene printing press, produced a printed version in 1838. And in and of itself, this renewed interest in the golden fragments, which is a 17th century work across the 19th century Ottoman Arab world, is quite noteworthy. It suggests a revived interest throughout the region for the cultivation of a form of cultural and political capital associated with knowledge of Ottoman Turkish. That Algeria took part in this region-wide interest along places like Cairo, Baghdad, Jerusalem, or Damascus suggests that Algerian elites were much more Ottoman, whatever this means, than is currently accepted, sharing the political concerns of other Ottoman Arab elites and joining them in an empire-wide community of readers. Portrayed in this light, 1800 Algeria appears as anything but the society in waiting that Lahoui suggested it was in 1970. To briefly conclude, the golden fragment manuscript of Constantine really tells two stories. The first links 1600 Cairo to 1800 Constantine and sheds light on Algeria's distinctly Ottoman Arab political condition, cultural milieu in the early 19th century. The second is about the nature and implication of the French colonial conquest of Algeria. And usually these two stories are told separately as they belong to different academic silos in a way. Ottomanists often travel to European libraries, and I include myself in this group, in search of manuscripts, but usually with little regards to the reasons why these manuscripts were in these European libraries in the first place. Conversely, French colonial historians study the power relations that render possible the voyage of manuscripts like the golden fragments from Algeria to France, but often with little regards to their actual content. Bringing together these two concerns, bridging their chronologies, reveals a richer, fuller view of modern Algeria's history. Admittedly, however, this is an incomplete story. Taken in isolation, the Golden Fragments manuscript reveals very little. It allows us to discover leads, formulate hypotheses, catch a glimpse of broader stories that other manuscripts would have, should have complemented. In other words, the Golden Fragments are just that, fragments. They do not tell the story of Ottoman Constantine. But what if we had access to Ahmed Bey's whole library? The disappearance of thousands of pre-colonial documents, stolen, looted, or destroyed by the French army, generate numerous blind spots, which historians, Algerian or otherwise, have to contend with today when writing the history of Algeria. Isabelle Grandville said earlier that colonization transforms the pre-colonial past. These blind spots and their epistemological implications constitute a form of historiographical injury precisely because they directly hinder contemporary Algeria's ability to access its own history. Thank you.
My job as a discussor is hard. I would say it's hard for the first time, this is so hard now. This is two magnificent papers, extremely rich in different directions, so difficult to find, I think, the real convergence, except to, like to repeat, to emphasize the richness of this Ottoman history throughout the 19th century, through even the beginning of the 20th century, right? I suppose I will just have two very quick questions, and then I will open to the Q&A. The first question for Noureddine is kind of fictional history kind of reflection. It seems to me, if I understand well, part of what's going on in those petitions and those people, asking for playing, let's say, with different registers of nationality. One of the reasons this is even possible, right, of the uncertainty around nationality is generated to some extent by the lack of formal treaty between France and the Ottoman Empire, right? So in that context, there is a lot of fluctuation, who's and who does what. The question of sovereignty is not solved, right? So that's part of what's going on, and that's why you have all this. So one of the questions is, do you think, it's a stupid question, but do you think that those issues would not have emerged if there had been a treaty? And the reason I'm asking this is that, there is this entire historiography of imperialism that insists on, a la Unstoller, right, on questions of epistemological anxieties or uncertainties. So is this another case of that? Or could that have been better solved if, or like would have been solved in a different kind of context? You know what I mean? Like, is this just another iteration of the epistemological and legal uncertainty, right? Because they don't know, what they're doing. But the question for Youssef is maybe in a way, at least formally, similar. I don't know. It's about the so one of the questions is about the what you call very interestingly the historiographical injury. All form of violent conquest produce historiographical injury, right? The destruction of the documents, the destruction of libraries, the destructions of native cultures, right? One of the issues maybe what's specific here in the sense that what is specific at that moment in that time, right? And the other question, I suppose, is about the bestseller quality of the golden fragments, right? So you say this basically, this text circulated throughout the empire, right, throughout the Ottoman Empire, and was found in many libraries. So one of the questions is, in that context, what is the status of this historiographical injury? That is to say, are those texts, just read without the awareness of the space in which it's circulated? So whether they read, I don't know, in Aleppo or Cairo, I forgot where you said they circulated, but like in all these places, were they read as independent text, or whether an awareness by the people who were reading them that they were belonging to the imagined community of textual exchanges around the Ottoman / Turkish Ottoman / Arabic language exchange, and what does that change? Whether a place where these, I mean, they were not unique, right? So whether a place where there was whether it's a space for some kind of recovery and reparation for this injury.
Okay. Thank you, Emmanuelle, for the questions. I don't know how to start for trying to answer the questions. Usually, I don't like this kind of precolonial, trying to answer a question on something didn't happen. But I have one idea. I believe that maybe it would have been worse if we had a treaty between the Ottoman and the Ottoman Empire, the French state. Why I believe it will be worse? Because behind the question of nationality is the questions of the conflict of interpretations of what is French in Algeria. And as I used to see in the archive, the production of the law, and then law for matters like just legacy, estate, everything is considered like obliged the two parts of the conflict to come back to the moment of the capitulation of Hussein Day. And what I want to say is, for me, law, it's a kind of law like the French state tried to make it effective in Algeria. It's a kind of historiography trying to recounting what is the pre-colonial history of Algeria. And on this topic, there is no agreement between the native and between the French states about what was the past, what is the present, and what being French without consent, but because of the war of conquest means. So everything is an excuse and something that obliges the two parts of the colonial relationships to try to explain what was the French conquest. So just I would like to add, because sometimes we say it's like a forum shopping, and because the Algerians moving to the Ottoman Empire have a very, very high legal consciousness of the legal pluralism, and they play the game of which state will be the best for me. They just try to gain social position and to play the game of the states. But behind this game that exists, it's true, there is always a question of the historical responsibility of the French states. So it's, for me, the most important one is that behind the law, I would like to see the questions of history and the conflict of interpretation of history. So I believe, yes, it would be worse if we had a treaty between the two parts, because it's a new text on which we can try to compare the different interpretations.
Thank you. Thank you for those two questions, and they're hard. They're both difficult. So I'm thanking you, but also acknowledge that. Historiographical injury. I mean, yes, I think what you said is very true. I mean, it's inherent to all forms of conquest because of the documentary because of the looting, because of the destruction, but also, for other long-term effects that have to do with the fact that the post-colonial state doesn't develop in a way that, or rather that it impacts the post-colonial state and the concerns of intellectuals, and we've seen it with Larry, for instance. So there are many ways in which I think this historiographical injury unfolds. I don't think there is something very specific, and there is something important, which I think is not always the case to this extent, is that, and both Zeynep, Çelik, and Isabelle Grandvaux sort of touched on that actually, which is that this happens in the archive in many ways, right? And so there's a more direct way in which the ability of Algeria to build narratives, stories about its past is impacted. I think there's a very direct impact because it's an archival impact. And so the manuscript here it's in fact, right, the very name, Supplémenture 1349, completely erases the link to Algeria. I mean, it was a very serendipitous find in the Bibliothèque Nationale. I was excited about it, but it was also completely erased as something that was connected to Algeria. It was in a Turkish subsection of the archive. And then what is this? Yes, then about this community of readers and whether or not it was self-aware. Right. It's a good question. I mean, in some ways it's difficult to measure. One thing I can say is that for elites in Tunis, in Tripolitania, and in Algiers, before the respective conquests, I think there was definitely an allure of Cairo and Istanbul as cultural producers. I mean, they're part of the empire. It doesn't mean that there aren't capitals and provinces in the plural, right? And so it made sense to me that someone like Ahmed Bey would go to Cairo, realize it was a bestseller, and bring back a copy or something of the sort. So I think there was a self-awareness from North Africa that this was an important book to read if one is an Ottoman Arab person of importance, self-perceived at least, and that. And so there's that, but at the same time, I suppose one could also make the argument that, from my perspective, it doesn't matter that much, the self-awareness, because, well, they were reading the same books. So, from a third party sort of historical perspective, I see the community of readers, whether or not they were aware of each other. For me, this is the point of departure to make an argument about cultural belonging, that even without self-awareness, I suppose. Or at least I'm interested in this idea. Yeah, I hope that touches on.
I suppose my question was about, so if there is an injury, can you can you find the library of somewhere else? Can you reconstitute it if it's you know what I mean? Can you compare that injury by locating other books somewhere else, and and so that was the idea.
No, I think
which is not possible at all moments of all conquest, right? Where this because this is happening already in imperial context, right? There may be a scattering of the library at this imperial level that maybe would not have happened different.
Yeah, and I think actually, yeah, it's a very good question, and you could do part of the work, right? You can certainly, obviously, it's important. It's impossible to do all of the work, but I could imagine a project, honestly, at the Bibliothèque Nationale, where historians do just that, right? I mean, these are marked. People were proud to steal these, right? They marked it. Like, that's how I was able to trace it. So, I know we're in the Maison Française, but there's another Maison Française in the BNF, and they there are all of these manuscripts. At the same time, many remained in private hands, like those of Peñot and other private collectors. So it would be. But I think asking this question already, in many ways, in a French context, as you know very well, is radical in and of itself, because it puts the reality of stolen manuscripts. It brings it to the fore, I think, in significant ways, at least in the French context, politically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to now we have a lot of time. We have 30 minutes at least for questions. So, Joseph, first. I think there might be a mic circulating, or you scream. Yes.
Thank you very much. I was wondering about what was happening legally in terms of the question of nationality and citizenship at the same time between French Algeria and Ottoman, as as we know, of course, as 1865 market transforms Algeria as a subject, but in 1869 is the first nationality born in the Ottoman Empire. All citizens regardless of religion, right? And in addition to the discriminations between the colonial settlers and Algerian natives in 1865, in 1870, the French introduced another discriminatory method to the community. And then, so in 1913, of course, in 1881, we have the Code de l'Indigène. So I'm wondering, in 1913, when this is happening, in the Ottoman Empire, nationality and citizenship were one and the same. Right? If you're a national, you're also a citizen. Clearly, that was not the case. Did the Ottomans raise this issue that national in Algeria, a French national, is not a French citizen, whereas an Algerian national or Ottoman national would also be a citizen. That's not especially because of Code de l'Indigène did not enter the law. The question to Dr. Ismail is, I'm just thinking of two sort of brackets about the question of the sacking of libraries and the destruction of manuscripts. So I'm thinking, for example, of the Mongol destruction of Baghdad in the 13th century and the sacking of all the manuscripts. That did not necessarily, while generally today is seen as a historiographical injury, it did not erase the pre-Mongol past of the acts, right? Then we have another sort of later, a similar situation, 1948, with the Zionist conquest of Palestine. Tens of thousands of Palestinian books and manuscripts are actually burned in Ottoman, and others are stolen in the Israeli libraries. That also did not seem to, despite, of course, the motivation to destroy Palestinian pre-Zionist history, didn't really succeed. What was so special about the French in Algeria in the 19th century? Is it just the period at the beginning of colonialism versus the Zionist conquest being at the end of colonialism and the Mongols being before colonialism as you know? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. The point is very important because the reason why the Algerian claim the French consular protections in the Ottoman Empire is because this legal statute gave them some advantages. And as maybe you know, the distinctions inside the colony in Algeria between being a French national but without being granted with full citizenships. It's something that that didn't work in outside the country. Outside the Algeria, the French nationality of the Algerian is also it's only the questions of the I mean the nationality is regarded just from the perspective of the public international law. So the distinction between full citizenships and being a subject doesn't work in the Ottoman Empire. So they have the advantages of the French nationality without the constructs like the Code de l'Indigène in the colony. And because they are French, so they can ask for being exempting from taxes in the Ottoman Empire and the conscriptions and a lot of advantages. About the questions of the first nationality law, I mean the codification of nationality law in the Ottoman Empire in 1869. In the archive in the Ottoman Empire, we find some copy of the French law of nationality, trying to make something more, I don't know if we can use the word of westernization, but because of the balance of power, I mean, the nationality law of the Ottoman Empire was something obliged in the context of very difficulty for the Ottoman Empire, and sometimes it just try to find a way to make happy, if I can say, all the other imperialist power. And yes, the question of the Algerian nationality became more and more important during this time, because during this time of phrasing the question of nationality, the question of who are the Algerians in the perspective of belonging to the state was more accurate. But the French state and the Ottoman Empire never find a real agreement. They made an agreement in 1911, but it was not a treaty. It was between the French embassy and the foreign ministry of the Ottoman Empire. So the question of what is the value of this treaty is very important. And sometimes we have conflict of nationalities started at the beginning of the 19th century and ended just before the independence of Algeria in 1960. So I don't know if I correctly answer you. Tell me, maybe I forgot something, but we can talk about that.
I just thought it was important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for this comment. It's a very challenging one. It's interesting to think. I mean, in some ways, it's related to Emmanuelle's question earlier. Two things I want to say to sort of begin to think about this. The first is that I want to make sure that I want to make two distinctions. The first is that this is injury, it's not an erasure. So there are distortions, but there aren't complete destructions of the Algerians' ability to tell stories about their past. So there, I want to nuance things because I think, maybe after this nuance, maybe we can actually find parallels with the two examples that you cite. And then the other distinction I want to make is that in particular, not all Algerian pasts were erased. The Ottoman one in particular was erased. And the reason for that is because it was already an imperial state of the French when they were right before and right after the conquest, because they had to erase this past to provide a legal basis for the conquest of Algeria in the first place, because only if they were able to do that.
And after we arrived at all.
Exactly, and to reclaim other pasts. And so I think it was not all encompassing and systemic. Well, it was systemic, but it was focused in particular on this Ottoman past in Algiers and in Tunis in particular. And you've written about this, Ismail. So maybe those two nuances help reframe a little bit the intervention. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. My question's for the team. There was all one. First of all, the slides you couldn't get to. So in 1860, there's this attack on Christians in Damascus, and famously Abdelkader gives them refuge in his house, and even Louis Bonaparte is threatening to intervene. So I saw it in one of the slides. He's mentioned. He meant I guess it's his son. Someone mentions in a petition. It says. Uses it in some way as like a claim to French nationality, or I don't know. Could you talk a little bit about how they're using the protection of Christians in Damascus as a kind of proof of French citizenship? I think that's what I saw.
Yeah, this one I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use this. Sorry. No, they don't use it like an. I mean, yes, they said when we defend the Christian during this. These events, are we are French or we are Ottoman? So why now you just don't consider us like not French subject, but under your protections? So I mean, it's not clearly a legal statute and belonging to the states. It's more something like close to some morality and on ethic, and they didn't use the rights of the law, because the right, if we just had a law to the right of the law, there is a French secular telling that the Algerians who move to the Ottoman Empire without registering themselves in the French consul, they will lose the right of being French subjects. And most of them never register to the French consul. Why? Because during the life of Emir Abdelkader, it was enough to be considered like a French subject, because they were under the protections of Emir Abdelkader. And also because these people played the game a kind of dual belonging to the states. I mean, sometimes they claim to be being Ottoman subject, and sometimes they claim to be French subjects. So yes, they use these memories of sustaining the French. I mean, not the French, but the French believe that all Christians or French are under the protections. But they say we use our violence for trying to sell the Christians, and we can use it again if you want to put our son under Ottoman construction. So for me, it's more a question of it's a mix of repertories of right and morality, but more morality.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yes. You should go.
Thank you both for these wonderful papers. I have something to add to what Professor Nassar asked to Youssef. And there's a really long history of looted manuscripts from Ottoman cities that one can trace back to the 17th century, for example. There's this concept of Noureddine, referring to all the Turkish or manuscripts of Ottoman provenance that were seized by European soldiers after the failed siege of Vienna in the 17th century. Today, almost 1/3 of the entire Islamic manuscript collections in Germany are those types of manuscripts. So I would like to reiterate that question: what's so special about 19th century colonialism? And let me add another question. Do we know anything about the very detailed social history of that particular manuscript's entrance into the BNF collection? When did it happen? After it was stolen by.
So I just want to, I'm not in the business of saying something special about the things I study. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not special. And I think it exemplifies a form of historiographic injury that can be, I mean, I think your point is very well taken. And this is the historiography that I deal with. So this is sort of the historiographical impact that I look at. In terms of how did, and you know, we have actual, I mean, there are gaps, as you can imagine, for this manuscript, but what happened was Peignou then sold it, and it passed private hands for a couple of times. You can see this with a number of stamps as well. And then the last one was a famous French Orientalist. I will send you the name escapes me now, of course, but who amassed a big collection as an Orientalist by training, to say, as it were, which Peignou was not. And then gifted his collection, as many did, and as you know very well, to the BNF, thereby creating a collection that is coherent, very, but a very late collection, and that still bears the name of this Orientalist in the BNF. And as you know, a lot of the Fonds Turcs, they also have these tags, the Supplement Turc and the regular Turc archives at the BNF, with the names of the person who gifted, the last person who owned them, the person who gifted it to the BNF. So ultimately, there is something a little contingent about the trajectory, because had this not ended up in the hands of this person who understood, you know, his social capital as being also a function of these gifts, then maybe it would have remained in private hands and not ended up in this library. Yeah.
You get one.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very talks. But I think, in fact, my question is not a new question, but it's maybe another way of what Joseph and other people were talking about, which has to do with, if I may put it that way, with the kind of paradigm we're working with. Sometimes it's called trans-imperial perspective, which, as it is oftentimes presented, is supposed to challenge the fact that we only use or have been using prominently French archives on colonialism, but also questions the very concept of colonialism as such. So I want to just ask you a very, in a sense, brief question: is how do we think about the ways in which the French Empire, the Ottoman Empire have struggled with each other, but also the intersections, the way they're entwined? How do we keep thinking about what's specific to French colonialism? And do we need specific concepts and different concepts to distinguish between imperatives on one hand, right, imperial colonialities on the others. And can we really, in fact, because I must say I'm skeptical about the fact of saying, okay, we study colonialism, from the French perspective, now in the Ottoman Empire, archives, and it's going to be, we're going to have a completely different point of view. Because in my view, then we still need, something is assumed, in fact, in the ways in which you analyze the archives, beautifully both. It's not the question. The question is, how do you think, is it possible to say that there is nothing specific about the kind of state which is going to emerge as the settler colonial state, for example, in Australia, right? And is the perspective which is, organized around the strengths imperial sort of circulations able, is it sufficient to sort of, analyze basically the specificity of this colonial violence which is deployed, in Algeria? I hope I'm making sense. I don't think it's a new question, it's a way of state specific which is set in quite another manner.
Yeah, thank you so much for these very good questions. And as you know, I wrote a lot of pages of this question, but I wasn't telling that, because we just put in the field the new archive that we are trying to challenge it. No, what I want to say, I'm not someone who works with label. So before working on my archive, I'm not someone who defines himself from the transimperial paradigm of the colonialism. It was not my aims. It was not the start of my own reflections. My own reflections, and if I should identify myself, I'm more like a smuggler. I try to, yes, to give more complexity of the situations, the transitions between this the Ottoman past and the French Empire. And what we see when we have a close look to these situations is all the question of fluidity that doesn't match with all this level of paradigm. So it's helpful sometimes, but sometimes it gives you like a narrow view of renewing my own questioning. But my first aim was to challenge the French classical historiography about citizenships. And for me, it was very important for my personal trajectory, and because I consider myself like someone who was dispossessed from its own history, and writing for me is a question of justice. So I can talk about this after if you want with you. But so maybe two key points I try to challenge in my dissertations. The first one is to consider that every Algerian wants to become French during the French colonizations. Like, the French citizenships was considered like a personal fulfillment and a kind of legitimation of the French state. And as we know, during 132 years, only 7,000 people asked for full citizenships because it was considered like a betrayal to the Islamic value, but not only in a religious point of view, because they believe that using the resources of the French state, because it's also considered like something sometimes resourceful, just by being a subject is enough. And trying to just become a full citizenships, and we call them, as you know, mtourni or mtrouzi in Amazigh language, that means someone who turned his spot, we say in English. So this is the first point. The second point is the questions of because Algerians, the natives, because this is the only one I consider like Algerians, and I can talk about that too. At this time, because the Algerians and the French citizens who came from all the Mediterranean country were under the same state, the same sovereignty. That means they share the same history. This is something, an assumption in the French historiography, and I challenge this point by showing that, as I said, there is no agreement of what it means to be French, and it was not the same belonging to the states for the Algerians. So I don't know if I correctly answer you, but I mean, it's not just questioning history with new archive. It's very renewing or questioning on the basis of my own subjectivity. And I want to acclaim this for trying to change the questioning of the French in Algeria too.
Very quickly to add to Nouredine's answer. I mean, I think, look, the idea, there are two parts to your question, so I'll address both. The idea that that the very move of provincializing French archives, working with Ottoman sources, ends up reifying imperiality versus imperial coloniality as two analytical categories. I think you're building a straw man here. I mean, this is not, we didn't really approach the sources in positive ways. I feel like the talk sort of, I think at least Nouredine's deconstructed archival truth claims. But I do think one thing about the archive is that I don't think we can talk about coloniality. I call it colonialism as an analytical category without the archives. I mean, I truly believe that. It's very hard to make claims like that. And so that's for the first part. The second part, you know, imperiality versus imperial coloniality, and can we, you said you were skeptical as to whether we can actually make a distinction between these two categories, right? Or are they actually the same thing? And if I understood you. Okay, what did you say? You made a distinction between imperiality and imperial coloniality, and I thought that's what you meant.
Not a way of defending this category. It's just very, and it's not a criticism, it is a question. I'm just wondering how we distinguish different forms of empire. I don't think that the French empire is only, for example, realism versus the
Right. Okay. Yeah.
This is not what I'm saying. In fact, the French empire is also an empire, has an imperial tradition.
Definitely.
Which is Roman, which is Christian. The interesting thing that you also didn't mention, doesn't need to say it has to be mentioned. It's precisely that there's a return to a certain kind of Roman ideal. Also, precisely because in Christianity, the Christian dimension of this imperiality of this empire is precisely transforming itself into the secularizing elements of the 19th century. But my point is that precisely if you, and I completely agree with that, this is why this is very perfect. It's not about just coming in and saying, what is that, and so on. I'm just really wondering, questioning the fact, how do we distinguish between these two forms of imperial tradition? So I'm saying, sometimes, and not, this is not what I
Oh, that's a good question.
Stops.
Yeah.
That sometimes this kind of way of doing this, which is very important, no doubt, ends up sometimes dissolving it. It's not what you did.
Please. Yeah.
Dissolving the very concept of modernity, right? Which, or the modern state, right? And it's not always the case, but I was just wondering how precisely you were working with this concept, because I do think that it's to a certain extent, you need the concept of modernity to address precisely the differences between the forms of empires, French, the Ottoman, and I don't think that the concept of colonialism or coloniality is the only possible way of distinguishing those.
It's good.
That's what I.
No, it's a good question. I'll just say one quick thing is I agree, and it's a difficult question. It's an open one, obviously. I mean, and I know you asked it as an open one, not in a way that begs a definitive answer. And I would never, I'm too prudent to venture into a definitive definition of imperiality. Certainly agree that the Ottomans are doing imperialism, and that the French are doing imperialism, and that colonialism cannot be, or colonial as an adjective cannot be the only way to differentiate these two. It doesn't capture this reality. I think, but I agree with your point of this point, and also the point of departure that they're doing different kinds of imperiality, both of which are modern, by the way, I think, very much so. But then you get into, a whole economy of analytical categories. Is it about legal culture? Is it about political? But I agree with that point. I just wanted to say about this that because I come from a place of concern as soon as the blurred line between colonialism and non-colonial imperialism are, when these two types of imperialism are sort of brought together, there are political implications that I find dangerous. I'm also not saying that to say that, but this is why sort of my initial reaction, because that's sort of the, as you know, the Macronist idea that was referenced earlier, like, well, you know, all of these are empires, and what the French did, the Ottomans did, there's that, but also even intellectual consequences in terms of how we define imperiality. So it's not the only way, but it's also, I think, an important way. I'll stop here, but I'm very interested in continuing this conversation.
I'm interested in actually in having in listening to both Isabel and Zeynep on this, because
Yeah.
I want to intervene with this, because in a way I think this question is at the heart of the entire afternoon.
I think it's in the heart, but it's also in the details.
Yeah.
I'm getting very confused. Nationality. Because I think you struggled a lot. The first nationality being registered in the Nufus, is that a national register? I'm also thinking about the 1869 Habeas Colony. It's not nationality. Habeas is something else.
Yeah, I know.
So, and perhaps it is related to the kind of refinement that needs to do in order. I mean, I don't have an answer, but I was confused hearing about Ottoman nationality. And I'm thinking perhaps when we're talking about the two empires, we have to think through terminologies.
That's what we do, I believe. And we're trying to do it.
I see you take certificates of nationality.
No, it's not me. It's the Algerian who asked for the.
Well,
Okay, and no, but you're right. The question of mythos for in this context, if the Algerians went to the mythos and being registered, it was considered like a beginning of evidence of belonging to the Ottoman states. And because some people did that, when they claimed the French protections, the Ottoman authorities said, no, we have his name, and his family registered in the Nefus. So that means they consider themselves by this act of inscriptions like Ottoman subjects. And
very different than
yeah.
using that very charged term.
Yeah.
Nationality.
But then, because of that, the question was around the question of nationality. We can, I mean, the word exists. I mean, it's not something that happens like that in 1869. It's not. I completely disagree with the idea of. I mean, the question of modernity is very interesting, but for me, the word it's something that makes me some trouble. I don't like it. So I don't know what you mean by modernity. I would like to talk with you about that. But what I want to say, it's not in 1869 that the questions of nationality arise between the French states and the French Ottoman, and because of the agency of the Algerians too. So it's more a kind of triangulation, if you can say that, with people, states, and authorities, and the questions of the interest at the moment the question raised. So that's why maybe for me modernity is not. I mean, it's not for me a concept very useful for me.
We have another question about it. Can I say one thing to the parts of the discussion opened by Dr. Maison, who's not paying attention? I wanted to. What I meant is part of this is an experiment in decolonizing the history of Algeria in the 19th century, right? So imperializing it to some extent, but getting it out of the clutch of the French colonial history, because Algeria at that time is not just a secular colonial state. So what happens when we think about it in terms of different kinds of dynamics, different kind of historicities, and so that's what is going on. So it's as much about the understanding of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I'd like to hear more about the Ottomanist, historian thinking about Algeria and how that changes, you know, and why this was, you know, why there was actually an erasure of Algeria from the history, from the Ottoman, you know, perspective on this, on the history of the Ottoman Empire. That's one thing, but also what happens to the history of Algeria when you do that, right? So this is important part. And I'm sorry, question.
To exactly this question, I think part of the trouble I'm having is that it strikes me that the historiographical injury that we spoke about is not primarily on the Ottoman past. And we have a wealth of Ottoman documents, as you say, both the history of their heritage as well are oftentimes very well preserved. It's not quite the same problem as the literal burning, let's say, of Palestinian documents, right? Non-modern but the real historiographical injury to me that colonialism does is actually on our understanding of the period of colonialism. Because what it's done, and I think what has been sort of inscribed in as afternoon's talks, is an idea that we're working with epistemically is an issue of what is colonialism and then what is not colonialism unless we recover colonialism. But as Judith Circus has told us, right, what Algerians experienced in settler colonialism was not primarily an outgrowth of the 1865 nationality law, but of the 1873 Borneo private property law, right? In other words, that much of what colonialism was a new regime organized around those sort of precepts of classical political economy that not only instituted new regimes of private property, but also intensified forms of debt. And what's so interesting for me to think about is that, like, these forms of intensified debt relations, if you look more globally, were instantiated actually precisely after the formal abolition of slavery in the British Empire in the Caribbean, right? And so it's actually precisely because we were living in the 19th century in a new that was post-abolition, right? Post a certain kind of, let's say, that we get the kind of financial relations that's so reliant on these later forms of colonialism, and then we get, of course, the into public debt administration, as of the Ottoman administration, right? And so I guess my question is, like, what is gained and lost by thinking about fetishizing even perhaps, you know, colonialism as a problem? And I'm not denying that it is obviously a big problem, right? But more to think about, you know, very well, we should be thinking about a trans-imperial approach as Muhammad has done so well, right? But once we do so, we have to acknowledge the precise forms of governance of subjects and citizens was not just in the name of colonialism, but in the name of other kinds of domination that were symbiotic but distinct from colonialism.
Okay, I will answer, but I'm sorry, I start to be a little bit tired. I will answer in French, and Emmanuelle will try to translate. Wow. Tu me dis quand j'arrête. Donc, oh, super. Comme vous savez, lorsqu'on fait une présentation, you understand French? Okay,
but maybe others don't.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, comme vous savez, quand on fait une présentation, on a une demi-heure, et comme je l'ai dit, c'est un travail qui m'a pris 10 ans. Ce n'est pas parce que je parle maintenant de la nationalité que je ne travaille pas sur les interactions entre ce qu'a été le travail légal fait par les autorités françaises, cherchant à déterminer la qualité des Algériens au regard de ce qui se fait sur la dépossession propriétaire. Il y a tout un développement dans ma thèse où, contrairement à ce que vous présupposez, ah oui, d'accord.
So as I said in this interaction, we have 30 minutes to propose an excerpt of 10 years of work. And so the fact that I choose to center on the question of nationality and the interaction between the legal work done by the French to determine the value of Algerian individuals and their claims to property.
Oui, donc la question, si vous voulez, et c'est peut-être une entrée de répondre à qu'est-ce que le colonialisme tel que moi je l'entends, tel que je le défends en tant qu'historien. Pour moi, le colonialisme, ce qui fait la différence avec l'Empire ottoman, ou l'État-empire d'ailleurs, on devrait dire ottoman, pour moi, le colonialisme et la colonisation, c'est trois choses. la dépossession de la terre, la dépersonnalisation de la culture, et aussi le rapport à l'indétermination, à la détermination de qui est qui. Et ce sont trois choses qu'on n'a peut-être pas au même moment articulées de la même manière dans ce qu'a été l'Empire ottoman en Algérie 3 siècles avant.
One of my definitional stance on the distinction between coloniality and colonialism and what is the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire state, is three things. One is to do with the dispossession of land. The second with the
Dépersonnalisation.
the depersonalization of culture, and the third to do with the meddling of
Je sais plus.
who is who. So there's it's integration also in like
The legal qualification on individuals.
yes.
Et juste pour terminer, je suis content que vous citiez Mohamed Ouabi parce qu'il était dans le search committee durant ma soutenance de thèse. Et tout ça pour vous dire que ce sont des choses qu'on connaît et qu'on discute, je veux dire, Ottoman Imperial et tous ces paradigmes-là. Mais je veux dire qu'ils ne me satisfont pas. Ils ne me satisfont pas parce qu'ils sont aussi biaisés. Et lorsqu'on travaille sur ce moment de la transition, on voit que les choses sont beaucoup plus fluides et beaucoup plus complexes. Et juste pour terminer cette dernière idée, je m'arrêterai là. Ce qui est à l'œuvre dans la colonisation en France, si vous voulez rendre de la terre disponible aux colons, ce qui fait la colonie, vous devez, premièrement, déterminer qui est qui. Et donc, la question de la terre et la question de la legal qualification of individual sont intrinsèquement liées. Donc, ce n'est pas l'un contre l'autre, c'est l'un dans l'autre.
So I'm happy that you brought up one of these present as my thesis board, and these are discussions that I'm aware of that we are having. But what I'm saying is that these prisms have a bias that don't satisfy me, because when we come to look at it, there's something much more fluid and complex at work in the French colonial enterprise of land dispossession. Because to make land available is a project that is inherently linked to the juridical qualification of individuals. To take land is intimately linked to the question of who is who, and so by focusing on nationality, I'm addressing part of that question.
Thank you.
Just a postscript. I don't think really financial debt raise the question of colonialism. After all, the indebtedness of Spanish America and of Greece and the British happened after the independence of both. So it was a feature of the independence of colonialism. The French indebtedness of Haiti happened after the independence of Haiti, not the colonialism. So it seems to me to make the financial indebtedness of the 19th century the only feature which might undo colonialism as having other types of features, especially land and geography, would do a disservice of this.
So I'd like to just respond to both of us and also Dr. Amara's excellent responses. I'm certainly not trying to displace the colonial, but what I'm trying to say is that there seems to be an impulse, a compulsion to say that because this is the colonial, which creates a distinct form of domination, right? That one risks here to idealize what is happening on, and I think this is, it's not as if what's happening in terms of like Ottoman finance is separable at all from the workings of British or French Empire, right? And so what I was trying to say is precisely a sort of imminent or sympathetic critique of colonialism, which I think you were also trying to pick up on a lot of. In saying that certainly the dynamics are trans-imperial, but that doesn't mean like absent of the forms of British or French domination that like articulated financial markets or the structure of debt, right? I just think that it's impossible to talk about the dynamics of colonialism without talking about this sort of new financial order. And it's interesting that it still seems possible to not talk about these things and make it seem as if we're understanding the forms of domination that were present in the 19th century that are all interested in. So that's all.
Just one quick answer, maybe. May I ask you a question, because it's something very interesting for me. I don't understand why we talk about trying to understand the Ottoman past of Algeria through what the colonial power did to the country. People consider that we try to idealizing Ottoman Empire. Who said that? I never said that. I mean, it's not. But it's really for me to read. I would like to understand, because Yeah, just let me finish, please, because my English is not so. So I would like to understand, because it's not because Algerians, went to the Ottoman Empire and they claimed for the French consul, but that means that they idealize the French states. No, they know the historical conditions, and because of that they use that at the same. Otherwise it's the same thing, between the state and individuals. There is a very big gap. It's not because, what I try to challenge is the big narrative from the state perspective. So please don't put me in this box of trying to idealize the Ottoman Empire, because it's not what I did, and it's, I don't need, I don't need state for it's not my point. I don't know, but I would like to understand why, because I would have these last comments. When you look to the archive, because it's it's a research grounded during 5 years in the Ottoman archive, the French one, the Spanish one, the Italian, and the Tunisian one, and Algerian one. So all of the Mediterranean area almost, okay? And when you read this archive, you see really explicitly the work of the French authorities trying to legitimate the French colonization by saying that the Ottoman Empire was a colonial power. It's not new. It's not since Emmanuel Macron, and because of that, because it's a work during the war of conquest, because it's a work of war. I'm sorry, but I'm hypercritical about that. I'm very suspicious. I don't mean that maybe they are true, but we have no evidence about that. The only evidence we have, it's the idea that they need to do this work for trying to say there is no state in Algeria, so no need for international treaty. There is no nationhood or national sentiment of belonging, so it was only tribe, so we can do what we want to do. So we can read this work. So that's why we try to understand this. But I'm not trying to say, oh, the Algerians were very happy during the Ottoman Empire. No, there is insurrection also. But it's not the same thing, because it's not at the same time. I'm against the idea of the equality, the historical equivalence from an empire in the 15th century, so with not the same technology of power that the French states had in 19th century.
I just began with my comments. The history I'm talking about is in contrast to Dr. Ismail's comments. For me, not primarily about the pre-colonial Ottoman past, but about the colonial era Ottoman Empire, right? And how we frame that in terms of actually existing modern colonialism simultaneous with the Ottoman existing, right? And it's for that reason that I precisely don't ascribe. I agree with you, yeah, absolutely, that I don't ascribe this idea of well, the Ottomans were also an empire at the time, precisely because if we look at the structure of public debt between, let's say, the British and French and the Ottoman Empire, of the opposite story appears, right? So I think that we agree on that. I don't see that project at all.
Thank you so much. We always like to agree. Stop, because we could disagree with you yet. So. Sorry. I'm saying this because I got a lot of signs from people on the back that we have to stop. We have a meeting at 6. So thank you so much, everyone.